I never thought in my lifetime to imagine what I hear today.
Tonight, an urban reserve in Winnipeg beyond imagination.
If you have an issue with them, I'd like them to show me their issue.
Plus, taking issue with Manitoba Métis citizenship cards.
We remind Premier Smith that no province has the authority to unilaterally change our treaty relationship.
And Treaty 6 says to Premier Smith, hands off our treaty rights. Good evening, Tanse, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. While the decision of whether or not to search a landfill near Winnipeg has come to a standstill, people across the country are mobilizing in solidarity with MMIWG victims and their families. And though hundreds of kilometers away, Indigenous community advocates in Montreal are getting ready to test out solutions. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
Small but mighty, a solidarity vigil on a snowy Saturday in Montreal, raising voices to honor the victims of the alleged Winnipeg serial killings.
What we learned is that if you choose Indigenous women, you will be successful because nobody cares.
Demonstrators are now camping out at the Brady landfill. And despite the city of Winnipeg calling for a pause in operations, Winnipeg police still insist they can't and won't search the site.
This was certainly beyond the scope of something that we thought was feasible.
Though thousands of kilometers away, homeless advocates in Montreal say the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women hits close to home.
This is seriously an issue here. It's not just something that happens in Winnipeg or in Vancouver. It happens here.
Across Canada, Indigenous women are 5 times more likely to be victims of homicide. In Montreal, they are 11 times more likely to be randomly stopped and questioned by police. David Chapman of Resilience Montreal says this creates a climate of distrust and makes Indigenous women more hesitant to report sexual assault or other dangerous situations.
I can tell you that there's predators right now that I'm aware of who are raping women on a monthly basis and getting away with it continually, targeting homeless women. And the reason why the authorities don't get creative is simply because they don't care.
This is why the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal created the Ishkwe Project to liaise with police and support urban Indigenous women. In 2021, they introduced a confidential tip line and are currently working to improve Quebec's MMIWG database.
We're really at the point where policy change is needed. We've had promise after promise from the government, and in my opinion, they're just not stepping up. So if you have a platform, if you're able to talk about the crisis, it's due time to do so. And I think that's the best form of allyship right now.
They've also recently launched a Red Dress Alert Facebook page, which so far has 2 published names. Donna Pare, an Inuk woman who vanished back in 2019, and 14-year-old Linda Ukwetuk Kirshner, who hasn't been seen in 3 weeks. But they're also working with Quebec Native women and provincial police on a Red Dress Alert app and push notifications, something federal MP Leah Gazan called for Canada-wide 2 weeks ago.
When a non-Indigenous person goes missing, they're usually found much quicker than when our people go missing. So if this is something that could at least bring awareness and people can sort of pay attention to, I think it's worth trying to do, and we're on it.
The Red Dress Alert project is expected to pick up speed in 2023. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
A new report by the Standing Committee on the Status of Women is examining the relationship between resource development and the rise in violence against Indigenous women and girls. This is a result of the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Now, our reporter Danielle Parody spoke to 3 Indigenous women about these man camps and what they would like to see done. She joins us now. Danielle, thanks so much for joining us here. First off, can you just explain and tell us, what did the women you talked to have to say about this report?
Yeah, so I spoke with 3 women. Some had lived experience in working in sex work, and one is an academic, Pam Palmater. And all 3 of them raised different issues depending on what their perspective was. One of the things that Pam Palmater talked about was that she really liked that the report linked the way that contamination of land and waterways affected Indigenous life, including family life, and that had a negative impact on Indigenous livelihoods and things like food security and social and cultural structure. One of the things that she said that she didn't like was that there tends to be in these sorts of reports a desire for the RCMP to play a bigger role. And Pam Palmater thought it was very important that we remember the role that the RCMP have often played in Indigenous communities, especially issues of racism or even sexual violence against Indigenous women. Danielle Boudreau talked about the need for training. She really wants to see education for camp workers, similar to other safety training that they take. And Naomi Sayers is a lawyer, talked a lot about how it's not a surprise when we have these communities that are full of transient workers and are in and out of a community and have no community accountability that we see instances of violence or social disorder rise.
Well, Danielle, this seems like a very complex issue. What is currently being done to keep track of any reports of violence?
So right now, and that was one of the recommendations out of the report, was that we have a better job of the government doing tracking. Of course, the government can't force the private companies to do tracking, but they can certainly compel through policy or through agreements. And so Naomi Sayers spoke about Manitoba Hydro and a project that they have been tracking since about 2012. Any claims of harassment, both internally and then any claims externally as well, and that they report those out. So everyone felt that there was need to measure these sorts of things and know what's going on so we can track if it's going up or if it's going down. But it did take us a while even to get to the point where everybody acknowledges that there is a link between violence against Indigenous women and girls and resource extraction.
Well, you've already said a lot about this, Danielle, but what else maybe should our audience know about this issue?
Yeah, one of the other recommendations in the report goes back to the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People, or UNDRIP. Among other principles, UNDRIP recognizes Indigenous peoples' rights to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of lands or territories or other resources. And it also really makes it clear that adequate compensation is important and that consent is important. So of course, because we're talking about violence against women and girls, you can see how consent and that notion of consent and making sure that we have rights and the right of refusal even is so crucial for the safety of Indigenous women.
Well, Danielle, it's certainly a lot of information, but we really appreciate you coming on and breaking a bit of it down for us.
Thanks, Daryl.
And we want to hear what you think about the stories you have seen to start our show tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. The opioid crisis continues to take lives across the country, and the Northern Territories are no exception. The Yukon coroner has just released grim numbers on overdose deaths. Here's Sarah Connors with a breakdown of those numbers and how they compare to last year.
According to a recent update by the Yukon Coroner Service, 25 people died in the Yukon this year due to toxic illicit drugs. 17 of those deaths were Indigenous. Here's what else we know about the numbers. 20 of those deaths involved opioids, and fentanyl was also present in 19 of the deaths. Benzodiazepines, or benzos, were confirmed in 6 cases, and cocaine was confirmed in 5 cases not involving opioids. Chief Coroner Heather Jones says every death is preventable.
When I look at this, 25 deaths represents a quarter of the deaths that I've investigated, and that's significant. You know, 1 in 4 of our deaths are now substance related.
This year's figure matches the total number of illicit drug deaths from 2021, and the territory continues to lead the country with per capita toxic illicit drug-related deaths. Jones says Yukoners must work together to ensure more lives aren't lost to the territory's addictions crisis.
I believe we're beyond stigmatizing these deaths, these people, that we're well beyond that. We can reach out and be aware and be helpful to each other and be very mindful of who's vulnerable and who's using alone, for example.
Since April 2016, the territory has recorded 76 opioid-related deaths. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says it's time for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to stop making excuses and properly fund Canada's ailing healthcare system. Singh was responding to comments Trudeau made in a year-end interview where he said that providing more money won't fix a broken system and conditions must be placed on provinces so that federal funds are actually spent on healthcare.
There's deep concerns with premiers like Doug Ford and Daniel Smith, who might use money to put it towards tax cuts instead of healthcare. That is not a good enough excuse for the Prime Minister to not act at this point in time. Prime Minister needs to find solutions, continue to fight to protect our healthcare system, because as it stands, things are untenable.
The UCP government in Alberta is being sued over its Sovereignty Act. A First Nation on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border fears the province will use the bill to encroach on treaty rights. Onion Lake Cree Nation filed a statement of claim against Bill 1. Onion Lake is seeking a declaration that the Sovereignty Act unjustifiably infringes on treaty rights, and it's seeking temporary and permanent injunctions declaring the act inoperative against its people. Chief Henry Lewis says his community wants to send a message to the Premier and province. The Sovereignty Act infringes on treaty rights. He's worried the province has granted itself too much power and can now encroach on First Nations territories and natural resources.
We remind Premier Smith that no province has the authority to unilaterally change our treaty relationship, which Bill 1 is attempting to do by ignoring our sovereign jurisdiction and treaty relationship.
There's no evidence within the legislative debates or elsewhere of consultation with any of Onion Lake's leadership or any of its people.
Now, Chief Lewis says Onion Lake sent a letter to Premier Smith's office in early December highlighting its issues with the act, but did not receive a response. The Premier's office sent a statement which reads, "We don't comment on ongoing litigation. The Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act is constitutional and does not interfere or undermine Indigenous and treaty rights." Now, Treaty 6 chiefs in Alberta released a statement saying the Confederacy of Treaty 6 supports our relatives in Onion Lake and their steps to take court action against Alberta. The Sovereignty Act puts our treaty and inherent rights at risk, and the Confederacy of Treaty 6 is still weighing our options for future action. A new Indigenous-led fund will assist First Nations in British Columbia to enter the regulated and lucrative pot industry. The BC Indigenous Cannabis Business Fund was created by First Nations, along with the federal and provincial governments, to help increase Indigenous representation. The feds and BC government are contributing $7.5 million to the fund over a 3-year period. It can help with costs such as licensing, permits, and creating a business. All right, it's time to step aside for a short break, but still ahead, after years of work, the largest urban reserve in Canada is now official in Winnipeg.
You know, we worked hard on this file for well over 20 years, past and present chiefs, and this was a difficult one for us.
Welcome back to APTN National News. It has been years in the making, but the Treaty 1 Nation finally reclaimed some of its traditional lands in Winnipeg. The land had been occupied for decades by the Government of Canada as the Kapyong Army Base. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
I never thought in my lifetime to imagine what I hear today.
Nawe Udena, or the Center of the Heart and Community, was made official at a ceremony in Winnipeg yesterday. It becomes the newest and largest urban reserve in Canada and is expected to bring billions in new investment and thousands of jobs. Leaders of the 7 First Nations that make up Treaty 1 Nation called it a historic day.
You know, we worked hard on this file for well over 20 years, past and present chiefs, and this was a difficult one for us.
The fate of the 64-hectare property had been in limbo since 2004, when the former military site was closed down. Canada initially tried to sell the land, but Treaty 1 fought to have it returned to First Nations through treaty land entitlement.
Winnipeg has always been a center of economic activity for our communities for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So this isn't something new for us. Unfortunately, we've had a bit of a disruption through our history, which we're starting to reconcile today.
The reserve will include commercial development, housing, a sports and recreation center, community spaces, as well as an administration center for Treaty 1 Nation. Ground will be broken in the spring. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The Manitoba Métis Federation governs over 40,000 Métis citizens, but their citizenship cards aren't approved for purchasing liquor or cannabis products in their Métis homeland of Manitoba. APTN Sav Jonesa went undercover to see where and why this is happening. Here they are with more on this story.
Sorry, but we are no longer accepting Métis. We have our second piece, like the other ID with you?
No, I just have that.
Yeah, we are not accepting that as a photo ID anymore.
This recently happened in suburban Winnipeg when we tried to use our Manitoba Métis Federation citizenship card as identification to buy liquor at a provincial liquor outlet. So we took a hidden camera to 15 different liquor and cannabis stores to see if this was a common occurrence.
Do you have your photo ID present?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, we can't actually take Manitoba Métis cards. We have to take actual, like, government issued.
Oh, okay.
I know it's issued by the government. I've been through this.
Of the 15 liquor and cannabis retailers we visited, 3 refused to serve us. 7 accepted our card with no issue.
Perfect. Right on. Hey, you are Métis. We'll give you 5% today.
And the other 5 didn't ask for ID at all. The Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Authority of Manitoba decides what identification is acceptable. Their spokesperson said the MMF citizenship cards are not permitted when purchasing these products.
These cards we have are well secured, and if they have an issue with them, I'd like them to show me their issue. Send it to me, write me a letter, or tell me where, because I will challenge them on that issue.
That shocked the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation, David Chartrand, who couldn't believe Métis citizens were being denied service here in the Métis homeland of Manitoba. We'll have more on that in part 2 of our story. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
All right, thanks for that, Sav. It's time for one more quick break. Our photo of the day and weather are next. Plus, find out how much snow fell in Vancouver. Stay with us. Welcome back. As promised, it's time now for our photo of the day. Kelsey Weber wants everyone to know that Little Miss Adeline wants to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Well, all the best to you too, Adeline and Kelsey. Thank you so much for that cute photo. You can send your holiday pictures to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 1 degree in St. John and 1 in Charlottetown. -7 in Cartwright and -12 in Coujawak. -2 and some snow in Quebec City and -1 in Montreal. -9 in North Bay and -2 in Sarnia. -11 in Wawa and -15 in Thunder Bay. Snow and -22 in Churchill and snow and -22 in Norway House. -20 in Barons River and -21 in snow in Winnipeg. Snowing and -24 in Regina and -22 in Saskatoon. -22 in snow in Buffalo Narrows and -27 in Uranium City. Heading out west, -25 in Fort Chipewyan and -33 in Grand Prairie. -25 in Edmonton and -26 in Medicine Hat. -5 in snow in Vancouver and -27 in Quesnel. -24 in Clare and Smithers and -39 in Fort Nelson. -38 in Beaver Creek and -44 in Dawson. -30 in Clear and Yellowknife and -36 in Fort Simpson. -31 in Colville Lake and -28 in Fort McPherson. Clear and -34 in Baker Lake and -23 in Arviat. -29 in Igloolik and -14 in Iqaluit. Well, a cold Arctic air mass is sitting over much of British Columbia, bringing heavy snow and frigid temperatures, and Vancouver was no exception. Vancouver residents woke up to a winter wonderland after the city received over 30 centimeters of snow overnight. While some enjoyed the festive weather, the heavy snowfall has caused mass cancellations of flights and ferries and chaos on the roads. Things could get even more challenging for the city, which is not equipped to deal with a heavy dose of winter. Forecasters predict 10 to 15 centimeters of snow could still fall. The Congress of Aboriginal Peoples is upset they won't have a seat on the National Council for Reconciliation. The council has been 7 years in the making and is supposed to hold the federal government to account on behalf of residential school survivors. On tonight's all-new episode of Face to Face, CAP National Vice Chief Kim Bowden says the organization deserves respect and not pushback from other Indigenous organizations.
We know that there's organizations out there, Indigenous ones, really trying to demonize us for some reason. And historically, we've done some incredible things for our people. I mean, we fought for Bill C-31, for example. We're the ones that put Métis in the Constitution. And, we're the ones that fought for Daniels with respect to non-status Indians and Métis across Canada.
Well, that episode of Face to Face airs in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere. That's all we have for you tonight. Once again,